I was standing in the shadows of my own hallway, my hand trembling over my mouth, as I listened to my mother-in-law whisper into my 4-year-old daughter's ear that I had abandoned her because I simply didn't love her enough to stay. My daughter, Lily, was clutching a stuffed bear, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs, while my mother-in-law stroked her hair with the gentle, practiced touch of a saint. I wasn't away on a business trip. I hadn't moved out. I was standing less than 10 feet away, newly returned from a month-long inpatient mental health facility that my husband and his mother had legally forced me into. They had convinced me, the doctors and the courts, that I was losing my mind. But as I stood in the dark, watching the woman who had orchestrated my destruction play the hero to my weeping child, the thick fog in my brain finally cleared. I wasn't crazy. I was being hunted, and they had no idea that the prey had just learned how to bite back. Welcome back to Chronicles of Vengeance. This is the channel where women share stories of family betrayal, quiet strength, and the boundaries they wish they had set sooner. If this is your first time here, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And wherever you are listening from right now, drop a comment and let me know your city. Now, let me take you back to a rainy Thursday evening, the night I realized my family was a crime scene. My name is Clara. For the first 5 years of my marriage to Julian, I believed I had won the lottery. Julian was a successful architect, charming and attentive. His mother, Vivian, was a retired judge. She was elegant, imposing, and commanded rooms without raising her voice. When my own mother passed away shortly after Lily was born, Vivian stepped in. She brought casseroles, hired a housekeeper for us, and offered to watch Lily so I could rest. At first, I thought she was my savior. But looking back, Vivian's help was the beginning of an invasion. It started with subtle things. I would buy Lily a dress. Vivian would return it and buy a more appropriate one. I would set a bedtime. Vivian would override it with a gentle, patronizing smile, saying, "Oh, Clara, let the child live a little. You're so rigid." Whenever I tried to assert a boundary, Julian would sigh, run his hands through his hair and say, "She's just trying to help, Clara. You've been so stressed lately. Don't push away the only village we have." He was right about one thing. I was stressed. Actually, I was exhausted. When Lily turned 3, a strange, crushing fatigue began to take over my life. I started sleeping through my alarms. I would forget conversations I had the day before. I left the stove burner on twice in 1 month. I started losing weight, my hands shook, and I felt like I was moving through underwater currents. Vivian practically moved in. She made me a special herbal tea every morning and evening. "Drink this, dear," she would say, her cool hand on my forehead. "You're just overwhelmed. You need to sleep." And I did sleep. I slept so much that I started missing Lily's preschool drop-offs. I missed her ballet recital because I couldn't wake up. Every time I failed, Vivian was there, capturing the moment perfectly, stepping in to hold Lily, shaking her head sadly at Julian. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The breaking point happened on a Tuesday. I had taken Lily to the park. I sat on a bench, drank the thermos of tea Vivian had lovingly packed for me, and the next thing I knew, a police officer was shaking my shoulder. I had fallen asleep on the bench. Lily had wandered off and was found crying near the street by a stranger. I was hysterical. Julian was furious. Vivian was terrifyingly calm. "She's a danger to the child, Julian," Vivian said that night, her voice carrying through the thin walls of our bedroom. "She's a danger to herself. We have to intervene before a tragedy happens." 2 days later, with Vivian's legal connections and Julian's signatures, I was involuntarily committed to a private psychiatric retreat for extreme exhaustion and suspected postpartum psychosis. They took my phone. They took my child. I spent 30 days in a pristine white room, sobbing, convinced I was a monster who had almost let her daughter die. But a strange thing happened at the facility. Without Vivian's tea, without my home environment, my mind began to clear. The tremors stopped. The crippling fatigue vanished. By the third week, my blood tests came back completely normal. The facility's lead psychiatrist looked at my charts with deep confusion. "Clara," he said gently, "there is nothing biochemically wrong with you. You're entirely lucid." I was released early, completely unannounced. I took a cab home, planning to surprise Julian and Lily, desperate to prove I was better. I walked through the front door quietly, and that was when I stood in the hallway and heard Vivian whispering to my sobbing 4-year-old in the living room. "Your mommy doesn't want you, sweetie. She chose to leave because she's sick in her head. But Nana is here. Nana will always be your real mommy now." I didn't walk into the room. I didn't scream. The betrayal was so absolute, so suffocating that it physically paralyzed me. My husband walked into the living room, handed Vivian a cup of coffee, and kissed his weeping daughter on the head. "It's going to be okay, Lily," Julian said. "Mommy is gone, but we're going to be a happy family." He didn't even sound sad. He sounded relieved. I backed out of the house as silently as a ghost. I sat in my cab, instructed the driver to take me to a hotel, and I started to think. Vivian wasn't just controlling. She was methodical. You don't convince a mother she is losing her mind just to babysit more often. There was a motive, a massive hidden motive. The next morning I went to the bank. I requested the documents for the trust fund my late father had established for Lily. My father was a quiet man, but he had been early employee at a major tech firm. Lily's trust was worth $4.2 million. The stipulations were strict. I was the sole trustee until Lily turned 25. Julian had no access to it. Vivian had no access to it, unless, of course, I was declared legally incompetent. If I was deemed unfit, the conservatorship of my estate and the control of Lily's trust would automatically default to my husband. I asked the bank manager to pull the recent access logs. 3 days after I was committed to the psychiatric facility, Julian had filed emergency conservatorship papers, drafted by Vivian's old law firm, petitioning to take control of the $4.2 million trust. They weren't just trying to steal my daughter. They were trying to steal her future. But to win a permanent conservatorship, they needed medical proof. Which brought me back to the tea. I hired a private investigator and a forensic toxicologist. Because I hadn't been home, my belongings were untouched. The investigator slipped into the house while Julian and Vivian were at a family court preliminary hearing. He retrieved my thermos from the kitchen cabinet and the loose-leaf tea blend Vivian kept in a special jar labeled Clara's Blend. The toxicology report took 3 days. When the results came back, the toxicologist called me directly. "Clara," he said, his voice grave, "this tea isn't herbal. It is heavily laced with crushed lorazepam and a potent muscle relaxant. Someone has been intentionally overdosing you with prescription sedatives for months. I could have gone to the police right then. But if I did, Vivian's legal connections might have found a way to spin it. Julian might have claimed ignorance. I needed to trap them in a room with nowhere to hide. I needed an audience. The permanent conservatorship hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Because Vivian was a retired judge, she had arranged for the mediation to take place in a private conference room at a prestigious downtown law firm, presided over by an arbitrator she knew personally. It was supposed to be a quiet, closed-door execution of my maternal rights. I walked into the conference room 10 minutes late. Julian was wearing a sharp suit, looking appropriately solemn. Vivian sat at the head of the table, looking like a queen who had already won the war. Her lawyer, a slick man named Davis, was shuffling papers. "Clara," Julian said, feigning shock. "You're supposed to be at the facility. Why are you here?" "You're not well." "I'm perfectly well, Julian," I said, taking a seat directly across from Vivian. I placed a thick black briefcase on the table. "In fact, I've never been clearer." Vivian offered me a patronizing smile. "Clara, sweetheart, this is a legal proceeding. It's for your own good and for Lily's safety. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." "I agree," I said. "Let's make this very easy." I opened the briefcase. I didn't pull out a tissue. I pulled out a stack of documents and slid them across the polished mahogany table. "What is this?" the arbitrator asked, frowning. "That," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room, is a certified toxicology report from an independent forensic lab. It details the exact dosage of lorazepam and muscle relaxants found in the herbal tea Vivian has been feeding me for 6 months. Vivian's face, usually a mask of perfect composure, cracked. Her skin turned the color of ash. Julian laughed nervously. "Clara, you're being paranoid. Mom doesn't even have a prescription for lorazepam." "No, she doesn't," I replied, pulling out a second document. "But her sister, Aunt Helen, does. And here are the pharmacy records, subpoenaed by my attorney yesterday, showing Helen filling the prescription and Vivian's credit card paying for it every single month." The room went deathly silent. The slick lawyer, Davis, physically pushed his chair back from the table, distancing himself from Vivian. "You poisoned me," I said, looking directly into Vivian's eyes. "You intentionally drugged me to simulate a psychiatric breakdown. You let me fall asleep on a park bench and let my daughter wander toward a street, just so you could build a case to take my child and my father's money." Julian stood up, his face flushed. "Mom, what is she talking about?" I looked at my husband, the man who had held me while I cried, telling me I was crazy. "Oh, don't play the victim, Julian," I snapped. I reached into the briefcase one last time and pulled out a transcript. "I hired a forensic accountant. You're $400,000 in debt from illegal offshore sports betting. Vivian was going to use Lily's trust to pay off your bookies to keep you out of federal prison." I watched Julian collapse back into his chair, putting his head in his hands. Vivian opened her mouth to speak, to spin a lie, to use her authority. But there was no authority left. "My lawyer isn't here today," I told them, standing up and buttoning my coat, "because she is currently at the district attorney's office. She is filing charges against you, Vivian, for aggravated assault, poisoning, and child endangerment, and against you, Julian, for conspiracy and fraud." Vivian tried to stand up, her hands trembling violently. "Clara, please. Think of the family scandal. We can settle this privately. I'll drop the conservatorship." "You don't have a family anymore, Vivian," I whispered, "and you never will." I walked out of that conference room and never looked back. The criminal trial was a media circus. Because Vivian was a former judge, the state made an example out of her. She was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for poisoning and fraud. Julian took a plea deal, accepted the crushing debt, and received 3 years. I retained full custody of Lily. I moved us to a beautiful house by the coast, completely paid for. I changed our phone numbers, our routines, and our lives. Lily is 7 now. She doesn't ask about her Nana. And she certainly doesn't think her mommy doesn't want her, because every single night, I tuck her into bed, wide awake, completely clear-headed, and fiercely protective of the peace we earned. If this story reminded you that the truth always comes to light, and that a mother's intuition is a weapon, take that as a sign. Do not let anyone gaslight you out of your own reality. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.